A stern judge was ready to sentence a scared teenage mother until he saw the name on her file. His face went pale as he realized her father was someone from his past. What happened next left the entire courtroom in tears. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. 17-year-old Ebony Carter stood on the marble floor of Pine Bridge County Courthouse, clutching a stack of crumpled documents. She wore her best outfit, faded jeans and a worn sweater, hoping to impress, but felt invisible under the lofty ceilings. The bailiff motioned her forward, and Ebony's heart pounded at the sight of Judge Theodore McAllister, infamous for his tough stance on teen parents. Ebony had braced for difficulty, but she never expected the showdown about to unfold. As Ebony sat at the respondents' table, stares burned into her. She was there to regain custody of her 5-month-old daughter, Serenity, who'd been placed in foster care after a report labeled Ebony unfit. The accusation cut deeper than she'd ever admit, because Ebony tried to be responsible. Raised amid poverty and transient living, she swore Serenity would have more stability. Now the system threatened to tear them apart. Ebony breathed slowly, preparing for a battle she feared she might lose. The clerk called the case, her voice echoing across empty benches. Ebony stood, eyes fixed on Judge McAllister. His stern face and silver hair belonged to another era, one with rigid views. Rumor said he routinely denied teen moms. A hush fell as he leafed through Ebony's file. Each flick of paper made her heart pound. She waited, silent, until he finally looked up. The chill in his gaze made her stomach tighten. He spoke, voice laden with authority. "Miss Carter, you're 17, unemployed, and living in uncertain circumstances, yet you seek custody?" Ebony's throat went dry. "Your Honor, I'm finishing high school," she said, hands shaking. "I just started a part-time job at a diner." The judge's scowl deepened. "A diner job? You think that'll support a child?" A murmur rose from the few onlookers, and Ebony's cheeks burned. She pressed on. "It's a start. I'm doing everything I can." The judge merely snorted in disdain. A ripple of tension spread. Ebony inhaled, recalling the pep talk she'd given herself that morning. "Serenity needs me, Your Honor," she ventured. But McAllister leaned in, voice dripping with contempt. "Needs or burdens? You parade in here expecting sympathy for a situation you created? Why should this court trust you?" Ebony's eyes stung. She fought back tears, forced a nod. "Because I'm her mother." The judge's glower intensified. Ebony recalled her childhood. No father, an absent mother. She knew hardship, but she believed love and resilience could build a better life for her baby. "Parenting classes don't replace maturity," McAllister shot back when Ebony mentioned her training. "You're barely more than a child yourself." Ebony gripped the table, voice trembling. "I'm doing my best." He only shook his head, unimpressed. Silence pressed in. Ebony saw the judge's grip tighten on his gavel. Then his voice rose. "I'm tired of teenagers waltzing in, wanting pity. You can't expect the court to hand you a baby you can't support." Ebony winced at each syllable, but refused to shrink away. She squared her shoulders. "I won't apologize for loving my child." Anger flickered in the judge's eyes. Thunder rumbled outside. Suddenly, his clerk whispered something. McAllister paused, then cleared his throat. "We'll recess. Miss Carter, wait in the corridor." Ebony's pulse thundered. She left under the watchful eyes of a handful of spectators, exhaling only once she was beyond the doors. In the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Ebony's breath came shallow. She heard faint whispers from inside the courtroom. Determined not to cry, she found a bench and sank onto it, hands trembling. Her entire future hinged on a judge who saw only her age and poverty. A voice startled her. You all right?" Turning, she saw a tall man in a dark suit, concern in his eyes. Ebony nodded stiffly. "Who are you?" The man hesitated. "Someone who knows more about your situation than you think." Before Ebony could speak, the bailiff appeared. "Miss Carter, the judge wants you back inside." "You too, sir." Confused, Ebony gathered her courage. The stranger placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Together they returned to the courtroom, now nearly empty. Judge McAllister eyed them both, tension thick in the air. Ebony braced herself for more scorn, but saw something different in his gaze. Uncertainty, maybe. McAllister folded his hands. "Miss Carter, new information has surfaced about your father's identity." Ebony blinked. She'd never known her father, never had a name. The judge's expression flickered. "Mr. Gaines here claims knowledge that could affect your custody case." Ebony's stomach lurched. Why did her paternity matter? The judge's earlier hostility seemed tempered by an unspoken shock. Ebony swallowed, heart pounding. I don't understand." The man stepped forward, introducing himself as Marcus Gaines. He had documents in hand, explaining they were sealed records from Ebony's infancy. "Your father's identity was hidden by influential people," Gaines said. Ebony's world tilted. If her father had power, why had he never come for her? The judge's stern mask cracked, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. "Proceed," he murmured, voice unsteady. Ebony realized something massive was unfolding, but she couldn't imagine how it tied to Serenity's custody or the judge's strange reaction. Gaines cleared his throat, glancing at Ebony with compassion. "Your father is... well, he's a decorated military officer, a man with clout. And there's more." The judge shot up from his seat, eyes wide. Ebony felt dizzy. Could this be real? The tension built, a storm of secrets about to break. She braced herself, unprepared for the shock that might shatter everything. Judge McAllister's complexion paled, as though a memory had rattled him. Ebony noticed his hand tremble as he gestured for Gaines to continue. The clerk hovered anxiously, uncertain whether to intervene. Gaines turned to Ebony. "I have a statement from your father, explaining he never abandoned you. He was led to believe your mother wished for no contact, that you were well cared for elsewhere." Ebony felt a mix of relief and anger stirring. Had her life been manipulated by secrets? Silence weighed heavy. The judge pressed his lips together, then burst out, voice strained. "Enough! This is a court of law, not a reunion forum." His outburst startled everyone. Ebony noticed a flicker in his eyes. Fear or guilt? The man who had just berated her for being irresponsible seemed on the verge of losing control. The stranger's presence, these sealed documents, Ebony's father's influence. Something about it all unhinged the judge's composure. Ebony braced, sensing the hearing was far from over. McAllister took a shaky breath, his usual confidence gone. "We will recess until I have time to review these new findings. Miss Carter, do not leave the building. I intend to reconvene shortly." With that, he slammed his gavel. Ebony's heart pounded. She sensed a sudden shift, as if the power balance had tilted in ways she couldn't grasp. Beside her, Gaines whispered, "This might be bigger than we realized." Ebony nodded, certain everything she believed was about to be rewritten. Ebony sank into a leather chair in a cramped waiting room adjacent to the courtroom, mind spinning with the possibility that this entire custody hearing had just morphed into something far bigger. She replayed the judge's reaction, the way his voice quivered when the stranger, Marcus Gaines, mentioned hidden paternity records. Ebony had expected a short, brutal hearing where she'd be shamed for her age and circumstances. Instead, the judge had abruptly recessed, then demanded she remain inside the courthouse until further notice. Nothing about that sounded normal. Yet here she was, flanked by Marcus Gaines, the man who claimed to know her father's identity. In the dull hush of the corridor, Ebony twisted her fingers around the documents she'd brought, evidence of her part-time job, her high school enrollment, and proof she'd completed a parenting course. Those papers suddenly felt small and irrelevant compared to the bombshell Gaines had dropped. Ebony's father was someone influential, and he'd been kept in the dark about her existence. But who was he? A doctor? A politician? A philanthropist? Questions pounded in her skull, fighting for answers she didn't have. Gaines eyed her gently. "You holding up?" he asked. She gave a shaky nod, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Why are you here?" she finally managed to say. "I mean, how did you know I'd be in court today?" Gaines ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Your father's been trying to find you for years. He got a tip that you were in Pine Bridge. When we learned you'd been assigned to Judge McAllister's docket for a custody matter, we moved fast. Honestly, we didn't expect this." Ebony sensed he chose his words carefully, as though the full truth would be too overwhelming all at once. Part of her wanted to demand every detail, yet another part trembled at the thought. So many emotions vied for space in her chest: anger, hope, confusion, and a surge of longing for a father she'd never known. The door to the waiting room creaked open. A weary-looking clerk in a rumpled blouse stepped in, her eyes flicking from Gaines to Ebony. "Judge wants both of you in his private chambers," she said. "Miss Carter, bring any paperwork you have. We'll reconvene there." Ebony stood on unsteady legs, hugging her folder to her chest. Gaines placed a reassuring hand at her back as they followed the clerk down a narrower hallway. Everywhere she looked, Ebony noticed the subdued hush of courthouse business, murmured conversations, the shuffle of shoes, the staccato click of office doors. She wondered how many desperate stories these walls had witnessed, how many young mothers had walked this same path and felt equally powerless. A polished brass nameplate reading Andra Theodore McAllister was mounted outside a thick wooden door. The clerk knocked lightly, then ushered them in. Ebony's pulse galloped. She forced herself not to shrink beneath the judge's steely gaze as he motioned them inside. His chambers smelled faintly of old leather and lemony wood polish. Thick legal tomes lined the walls. A window overlooked the courthouse steps, where people milled in the midday sun. Yet the tension inside was palpable. Judge McAllister didn't immediately speak. Instead, he stared at Marcus Gaines with a look that bordered on fury. Something flickered in the judge's expression. Animosity, maybe. Then his attention snapped to Ebony, and she braced for another barrage of accusations about her age. But he didn't berate her. Instead, in a tone clipped but lacking its previous venom, he said, "Sit." Ebony lowered herself into one of the chairs before his imposing wooden desk. Gaines settled beside her. The judge remained standing, shoulders taut. "This is highly irregular," McAllister began. His voice wavered, though he tried to sound composed. "Bringing extraneous matters into a custody hearing, especially with sealed records." Ebony frowned. Sealed records? She was only 17, a high school junior with no illusions about life, but she'd never heard anything about her father beyond vague rumors her mother used to dodge. The judge picked up the documents Marcus Gaines had provided, flipping pages with deliberate slowness. Ebony's mouth went dry. Some of those pages might reveal secrets that turned her entire life inside out. "What's so irregular," Gaines cut in calmly, "is that Ebony Carter's paternal rights were never acknowledged. Her father's name was concealed, apparently by people with far-reaching influence, which may include officials in this very county." Ebony's breath hitched. The judge's face paled. She sensed a deep undercurrent here, something personal. Why else would McAllister look so shaken? "This hearing is about Miss Carter's ability to parent," the judge said stiffly. "Not about unearthing old conspiracies." Gaines didn't back down. But the father's identity directly impacts Ebony's support system, he argued. If he's able and willing to help, it changes the entire case, Your Honor. Ebony's head spun. Support system? The concept of having real backup? Maybe a stable living situation? Was that possible? Serenity could grow up with more security than Ebony ever had. She felt a surge of hope, tempered by skepticism. Where had he been all her life? Judge McAllister's eyes flashed with an emotion Ebony couldn't decipher. "Are you aware," he said to Gaines in a low voice, "what it means to unveil these records?" He slammed a hand down on his desk, making Ebony jump. "Do you understand the fallout?" Ebony noticed his hand trembled slightly, knuckles white. The judge's usual commanding posture seemed shaken by something bigger than Ebony's custody petition. What secret could unravel him so thoroughly? "I'm fully aware," Gaines replied. "I don't think you want a perjury charge on your record, Your Honor. If you withhold evidence that impacts this young woman's rights, that's a serious breach." Ebony blinked. Perjury? Breach of judicial duty? Why would McAllister risk that for her father's hidden identity? She'd come expecting a scolding from a judge who disliked teenage mothers, not a standoff that might topple his entire career. McAllister exhaled, shoulders slumping. He glanced at Ebony, and for the first time she saw something approaching regret in his eyes. "Miss Carter," he began, voice softer than before, "your father is a decorated officer, a man with a complicated history in this county." Ebony's heart hammered. "What's his name?" she whispered. She couldn't stand the suspense another moment. The judge hesitated, flicking a glance at Gaines, then seemed to steel himself. "Colonel Daniel Carter." Ebony's mouth fell open. Carter. The last name echoed her own, but she'd never heard that first name from her mother or anyone else. Daniel Carter. The judge's shoulders sagged as though he'd been forced to reveal a deeply kept secret. He served multiple tours overseas, returned stateside, and apparently discovered rumors of a daughter, McAllister continued. He spent years investigating, but local records were altered. Ebony's skin prickled with shock. Her father was Colonel Carter, a highly respected name in military circles if the judge's tone meant anything. And apparently the judge himself had known. She struggled to process it. Why would a judge bury that truth? Marcus Gaines's expression was grim. Colonel Carter faced hurdles at every turn. Doors slammed, files went missing. Until last week he had no proof Ebony was alive and in need. Then this hearing notice surfaced. Ebony felt her stomach churn. She clenched her hands. If her father had truly tried searching, who blocked him? Who decided Ebony should never know? Judge McAllister cleared his throat. "Your father had enemies," he said, gaze somewhere near the thick drapes on his window. "People who wanted leverage over him. That might be why you ended up left out of official records. But let me be clear. This changes nothing about my immediate assessment of your fitness as a parent. The child's welfare is my sole concern." Ebony tried to speak but found her voice stuck. Anger and relief intertwined in her chest. The judge's words sounded forced, as though he had a personal stake. She wanted to scream at him for acting like he held every card, for ignoring that she was a terrified 17-year-old mother clinging to hope. "I disagree," Gaines countered, unwavering. Colonel Carter's involvement could alter Ebony's living conditions drastically. He stands ready to provide stable housing, financial support, and ensure Serenity is cared for. Ebony's cheeks flamed. Did that mean she wouldn't have to fight this alone? The judge gripped a pen, rolling it between his fingers. "I'll consider the father's input if he officially appears in court," he muttered. "But until then, I see only speculation." A sudden anger flared in Ebony's chest. Her voice burst out before she could stop it. Speculation? You've been yelling at me to prove myself fit for serenity, but you've hidden that my father might help me. How is that justice? She hadn't meant to yell, but frustration boiled over. She was sick of being powerless. McAllister's glare returned. "Watch your tone, Miss Carter," he warned. But his usual venom sounded hollow, undercut by guilt. Ebony didn't shrink. "No, you watch yours," she replied, surprising herself. "I'm Serenity's mom, and maybe now I have a father who can help. Why don't you want me to know that?" The question hung in the tense air. Judge McAllister's eyes flickered, a flash of pain crossing his rigid features. Gaines placed a cautionary hand on Ebony's arm, but she shook her head, refusing to back down. She needed answers. Why had the judge, who seemed determined to belittle her, looked so haunted at the mention of Colonel Carter? McAllister straightened, clearing his throat. "I'm not here to debate conspiracies. I'll schedule a continuance. In 2 weeks, if Colonel Carter wishes to testify or support your case, he may appear. But don't expect sympathy from this court. I have a responsibility to protect the child's best interests." Ebony wanted to retort that if he truly cared about Serenity's best interests, he wouldn't have withheld crucial knowledge that could strengthen her case. But something in McAllister's countenance, a flicker of shame, made her hold back. It was as if he was wrestling with invisible chains. "Fine," she whispered. "We'll bring him in 2 weeks." The judge gave a curt nod, scribbled notes, then waved them away. Gaines guided her toward the door, but Ebony paused, turning back. "One more thing, Your Honor," she said, voice trembling. "My father's name might change my life, but I won't let you hold that over me. I will get Serenity back, with or without his help." For an instant she saw the judge's face contort, as though he battled an onslaught of regret. Outside in the corridor, Ebony's knees felt weak. She pressed her back to the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Gaines stood beside her, expression solemn. "You did well," he said softly. "But we have work to do. Colonel Carter has to know the date of this continuance." Ebony nodded, her mind already spinning about how to contact him. She hardly knew this man, and yet he was her father. A swirl of emotions, anticipation, anger, hope, clashed, leaving her dizzy. "What if he doesn't come?" she asked, voice cracking. Gaines rested a hand on her shoulder. "He will. He's waited years for this chance." Ebony nodded slowly, praying that was true. She pictured Serenity's face in her mind, soft cheeks, tiny fingers that curled around hers. Everything she was doing, all the fear she faced, it was for that precious child. She'd get her baby back. The swirling storm of secrets, missing records, and the judge's haunted guilt would not break her. They moved toward the exit together, footsteps echoing. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows at the courthouse entrance, a stark contrast to the dim tension they left behind. Ebony inhaled, fresh air filling her lungs. In 2 weeks, she'd return with Colonel Carter at her side. Or so she hoped. She had no idea what those days would bring, what new obstacles might arise, or how deeply the judge's entanglement ran. But Ebony had survived years of instability. She wouldn't crumble now. She glanced at Gaines. "Let's go figure out how to tell my father he has a granddaughter." He gave a small, resolute smile. "Yes, let's." With that, Ebony stepped outside, bracing for the hardest fight of her life. She was determined that neither Judge McAllister's rage nor any secret conspiracy would keep her from raising Serenity. And if her father truly wanted to be part of her life, Ebony would make sure his long silence ended. The countdown to the next hearing had begun, and with it, the unraveling of every lie that threatened to keep them all apart. Ebony stepped onto the sidewalk outside Pine Bridge County Courthouse, squinting into the bright sun that felt out of place on a day so burdened with tension. Clutching her thin folder, she stood close to Marcus Gaines, determined not to show how unsteady her legs felt. She had only 2 weeks before she had to reappear before Judge McAllister. 2 weeks to somehow involve a father she had never met. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Gaines gestured toward a quiet bench near the courthouse steps. "Let's talk logistics," he said. Ebony followed, relieved to be off her feet. The moment she sat, the anxiety returned in a flood. "How do we even find Colonel Carter?" she asked, voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. Gaines's expression softened. "He's stationed a few hours away. I can contact him tonight. He's already been anticipating news but had no idea you'd be in court today." Ebony exhaled, leaning forward. "So he's known I exist, just not where to find me." 1,000 questions battled in her head, but that one mattered most. All her life she'd believed her father never cared. "He found out years ago that your mother gave birth while he was deployed, but by the time he returned stateside, she was gone. She'd moved, changed addresses. Certain officials blocked access to your records." Gaines sighed. "He's tried so hard, Ebony, truly. Every time he made progress, something shut him down." Ebony's eyes stung. She could almost picture a stack of letters never delivered, phone calls intercepted. But who would do such a thing, and why? Her next thought hit like a hammer. If someone was powerful enough to hide her father's existence, they might also be powerful enough to sabotage her custody battle for Serenity. Perhaps that was why McAllister acted so rattled. Gaines seemed to read her mind. "I suspect the judge knows more than he's letting on. Maybe he was pressured, or maybe he has personal reasons. But let's not focus on him right now. The big step is telling your father he can finally see you." Ebony studied Gaines. "How did you get involved in this?" He offered a tentative smile. "I served under Colonel Carter years ago. After my discharge, I worked in private security, then investigated missing persons cases. When he realized someone was blocking attempts to find you, he asked me to help. Eventually, we got a lead on Pinebridge. It's been a maze of closed doors ever since." Ebony nodded slowly, heart tight with wonder and resentment. If her father had indeed tried, she wanted to believe it. Still, the absence of his presence haunted her entire childhood. She couldn't just dismiss that pain. They agreed to meet later that night so Gaines could arrange a video call or phone conference with Colonel Carter. Ebony had no place else to be. She lived in a small motel room, precariously financed by her diner tips. She didn't want to drag Gaines into that cramped space, so she proposed a coffee shop near the motel. He hesitated, perhaps realizing how strapped she was, then nodded. "Let's do it," he said gently. "And don't worry, I'll buy the coffee." She had a 2-hour window before they'd meet. Deciding she needed to see Serenity, even if only from a distance, she hopped a bus to the foster home where her baby currently lived. Each mile felt heavy, reminding her of all the ways life had knocked her down. She could still hear McAllister's scornful voice in her head. But Ebony was determined. She'd push forward. When she reached the rundown neighborhood, Ebony's heart thudded at the sight of the gray shingled house. A rusted fence lined the yard. The foster mother, Mrs. Radcliffe, had been polite enough during supervised visits, but Ebony always sensed reluctance. She approached the front steps, every nerve on high alert, and rang the bell. After a minute, the door opened a crack. Mrs. Radcliffe peered out, brow furrowed. "Oh, Ebony, didn't expect you." Ebony inhaled, hands clasped. I just wanted to ask how Serenity's doing." A faint sigh escaped Mrs. Radcliffe's lips. "She's fine. We just got her to nap." Ebony's chest ached with longing to hold her daughter, to see her tiny face. Her voice wavered. Could I peek in? I'll be quiet." She half expected refusal, but Mrs. Radcliffe relented with a small nod, leading Ebony inside. She guided her to a dim hallway where, behind a half-open door, a crib stood beneath a mobile. Serenity slept, cheeks round and peaceful, tiny fists curled. Ebony bit her lip hard to keep tears at bay. She craved that warm weight in her arms, the scent of baby shampoo. One day soon, she promised herself. 2 weeks. You can make it. Mrs. Radcliffe's voice was subdued. "I heard you were in court again. Any news?" Ebony whispered, gaze locked on her child. "A continuance was granted. My father might help me." The older woman's features shifted in surprise. "Didn't know you had one around." Ebony could only nod, unwilling to share more. She didn't trust how quickly rumors might spread, or whether the judge's hostility might escalate if he heard Ebony discussing the situation. She forced herself to leave, promising to return in a few days for her scheduled visit. The bus ride back felt even longer as she replayed the quiet sight of Serenity's slumbering form. Fury at Judge McAllister simmered. He'd acted as though Ebony's life choices were worthless, but Serenity's existence deserved better. If Colonel Carter could truly help, Ebony would swallow her lingering hurt over his absence and do whatever it took. Their next court date couldn't come fast enough. That evening, Ebony arrived at the coffee shop early. She settled into a corner booth, tapping restless fingers against the cracked vinyl seat. When Marcus Gaines walked in, she managed a wan smile. He carried a sleek laptop and set it on the table. "I talked to him," Gaines said quietly. "He's eager to see you." Ebony's heart pounded. She sipped water, hands sweating. "Video call?" Gaines nodded, opening the laptop. "He's on standby." Anxiety roared within her, but Ebony inhaled slowly, bracing for the father who might change her life. When the screen flickered, a strong-jawed man in a neatly pressed shirt appeared. His hair was peppered with gray, and lines edged his eyes, but Ebony couldn't miss the faint resemblance. They both had the same high cheekbones, the same solemn stare. "Ebony?" he said, voice thick with emotion. The years of absence weighed in that single word. Her throat closed. She forced out a tremulous response. "Yes." Her father's expression flickered with relief and sadness. I can't believe I'm finally talking to you." Behind him, she noticed a modest living room, a coat with military insignia on a chair. This was real. Her father was real. She found herself blurting, "Why didn't you come sooner?" The raw hurt slipped out before she could contain it. Colonel Carter looked pained, brow furrowing. "Because I didn't know where you were." "Your mother disappeared, Ebony. And every channel I tried, court records, social services, they always turned up empty. I thought maybe your mother wanted me gone. Then I heard rumors that certain officials didn't want me poking around." Ebony's eyes burned. "I didn't even know your name." He nodded grimly. "That's on me. But it's also on people who took advantage of my deployments. I had no clue you were alone." Beside her, Gaines offered a gentle nudge. Ebony inhaled deeply, tears threatening. "I'm not alone," she murmured. I have a daughter. Her name is Serenity. The court took her. I'm trying to get her back." Colonel Carter's eyes flicked wide with shock and an undercurrent of determination. "Marcus told me. I want to help. I can provide a home, health insurance, whatever you need. You shouldn't be fighting this by yourself." It was so straightforward the way he offered support. But Ebony's chest knotted. "I don't want a handout," she whispered. "I just need a real chance. Judge McAllister hates me. He doesn't think a 17-year-old can be a mom." The colonel's jaw tightened. "McAllister has a lot of history in Pine Bridge. Let's just say I have my own history with him. Ebony's mind spun. A father-judge feud might explain why McAllister looked cornered. Did they once serve on some committee? Did they clash over local politics? "I'll come to Pinebridge," Colonel Carter vowed. "I'll testify, prove you have family support." Ebony nearly sobbed in relief. Despite the complicated swirl of resentment and longing, she felt a spark of hope. "Thank you," she managed. "But are you sure you're safe doing that?" McAllister seemed afraid. The older man nodded grimly. "I've dealt with worse. This time no one's stopping me from standing with my daughter." They spoke for another hour, each carefully bridging the years. The colonel told her about his tours, how he'd tried returning stateside when he first heard rumors of a baby, how confusion and deception forced him to rely on quiet inquiries. Ebony shared cautious details of her struggles, her mother's frequent moves, her attempts to remain in school despite constant upheaval. He listened without pity, only compassion, which felt both comforting and odd. Finally, he made her promise to meet him the next evening at the local diner where she worked. He'd arrange a short leave, enough to prepare for the hearing. When the call ended, Ebony slumped back in the booth, emotionally drained. Gaines closed the laptop gently. "You did well," he said. She nodded, tears still burning. "That was the first time I ever—" She trailed off, speechless. The father she'd pictured as indifferent was real, and the flicker of love in his eyes rattled every assumption she'd clung to. Gaines slid a coffee across the table. "Here, decaf," he said with a small grin. Ebony attempted a shaky sip. She found words tumbling out. "What if he hates me for being pregnant? What if he thinks I messed up?" Gaines shook his head. "He's not that kind of man. He might be stunned, but he cares. He wants to help." Ebony nodded slowly. "I guess we'll find out." She glanced around, noticing that beyond the coffee shop window, night had fallen. The streetlights glowed on empty sidewalks. A day that began in terror at the courthouse had somehow ended in a moment of hope. 2 weeks, she repeated as though reminding herself. "And I'll have a father by my side." Gaines smiled. And a better shot at regaining serenity. Ebony's heart clenched at her daughter's name. "Yes, that's what matters most," she said softly. Rising to leave, she gathered her things, still shaky from all the revelations. But inside that trembling, she felt a core of steel, newly forged. This time she wasn't alone. They parted outside beneath flickering lights. Ebony trudged back to her motel room, mind spinning with new truths. She pictured Colonel Carter's face, the pride and sorrow mingled in his features. Tomorrow, she'd see him in person. There would be questions and awkwardness, but also the prospect of rebuilding a bond that should have existed all along. She unlocked her tiny motel room and flicked on the single lamp. The peeling walls and musty carpet felt especially grim after the emotional roller coaster of the day. Yet Ebony felt more determined than ever. She set her alarm, then sat on the sagging bed, staring at a photo of Serenity she'd taken months ago on her phone. "Hold on, baby girl," she whispered. "Mommy's coming for you." And if Colonel Carter was half as steadfast as he seemed, perhaps Serenity would also gain a grandfather who cared. Ebony jolted awake before dawn, her alarm buzzing against the chipped nightstand. She forced herself upright in the stale motel room, nerves skittering in her stomach. Today was the day she would meet her father in person. Colonel Carter, a name that rang both hollow and full of promise. Her mind replayed the video call, his lined face, the sincere apology in his voice. It felt surreal. She splashed water on her face in the tiny bathroom, the overhead light flickering as she tried to steady her breathing. This meeting could change everything for Serenity's future, if Ebony could set aside her hurt long enough to accept his help. She dressed in her diner uniform, black pants, white shirt, and a plain apron. Despite the early hour, she felt jittery and awake. She left the motel and walked 4 blocks to catch the first bus, the sky tinged pink. Seated by the window, she stared at passing storefronts and wondered if Colonel Carter would keep his word. A tight coil of fear in her chest warned that trusting new people rarely ended well. But Serenity's face, so small and vulnerable, anchored her resolve. If Ebony wouldn't fight for her daughter, who else would? She arrived at the diner just as her boss unlocked the door. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, revealing scuffed floors and plastic booths. Ebony tied her apron, greeting her co-workers with a distant nod. She had a shift to finish before her father appeared. The hours crawled. She refilled coffee, took orders, delivered plates with mechanical efficiency. Her mind churned over questions. How would it feel to stand beside him? Would they even look alike, the same as they had on the computer screen? Each time the bell above the entrance jingled, she glanced up nervously, heart pounding. He arrived half an hour before her shift ended. She knew it instantly, the confident posture, the short-cropped hair with touches of gray, the way his gaze swept the diner as though assessing an unfamiliar terrain. When he spotted her, relief and sadness flickered across his face. Ebony's stomach twisted. She wiped her hands on her apron, forcing herself to approach. She felt every diner patron's eyes on them. Colonel Carter stood and gave a tentative smile. "Ebony," he said quietly, as though testing her name on his tongue. She nodded stiffly, throat too tight to speak. He looked older in person, lines around his eyes hinting at countless stories. "I'm sorry," he began, but she swallowed hard, motioning for him to sit at a booth by the window. "I get off soon," she managed. "I can't talk long now." He nodded, understanding. She served him coffee, noticing how her hands shook. She hadn't imagined the tension that would crackle between them. She retreated to finish her tables, glancing over occasionally to find him sipping coffee, gaze distant. Her co-workers shot curious looks, but no one asked questions. At noon, her shift ended, and she slipped out of her apron. Gathering courage, she approached him. His posture straightened, betraying his military discipline. "You hungry?" she asked, voice flat. Colonel Carter managed a small smile. "I could eat if you want to talk here." Ebony shrugged. "Fine." Despite her nerves, she slipped onto the vinyl bench across from him. She noticed a faint tremor in his hands as he set down his mug, though his face remained composed. He gestured to her uniform. "You look responsible, holding a job and going to school." Ebony tensed, uncertain if that was a compliment or an observation of her hardships. "I try," she replied. "Rent, groceries, it all adds up." She studied him in the harsh midday light. "So," she exhaled, "you're real. You're here." Her voice quavered on the final word. Colonel Carter's expression tightened. "I wish I'd been here for every year I missed." Ebony averted her gaze, tears threatening. "I used to wonder if you were a bad guy, if you just disappeared." Her tone was clipped, but heartbreak laced each syllable. He swallowed. "I'm not asking for instant forgiveness, but I never wanted to abandon you. I learned too late that your mother was pregnant. When I came back from overseas, she was gone." Ebony's chest constricted. She wanted to ask why her mother never mentioned him, but the woman was gone now, lost in her own cycles of instability. "It's complicated," Ebony murmured. "My mom never said much." The waitress came by, and Colonel Carter ordered 2 burgers and fries with quiet politeness. Ebony realized her appetite was absent, but she let him order for her anyway. After the waitress left, Colonel Carter cleared his throat. "Tell me about Serenity." Ebony's shoulders loosened slightly. He remembered her child's name. "She's beautiful. she began, voice unsteady. 5 months old, big dark eyes, a sweet laugh. They took her because I didn't have stable housing. She swallowed. I did everything right. Took a parenting class, got this job. But Judge McAllister claims I'm unfit. A flash of anger crossed her father's face. McAllister, he muttered. He's the one who sealed certain records. He's no fan of mine. Ebony's brows shot up. Why would a judge do that? Colonel Carter shook his head. We clashed years ago. I was involved in a local investigation that exposed corruption in city contracts. Some powerful figures had ties to McAllister. I suspect they manipulated documents to keep me away from Pine Bridge. I never had direct proof, though. Ebony considered the judge's haunted expression in his chambers. Now it made sense. So he's punishing me for your feud? Her father's eyes narrowed. Or being pressured to keep quiet about you. Either way, I'm determined to fix this. Ebony's chest tightened with gratitude and lingering resentment. She wanted to trust him, but a lifetime of fending for herself hadn't taught her how to lean on anyone. I have 2 weeks until the next hearing, she said, voice firm. I need your help, but I also need to be sure this is real. I can't promise I'll call you Dad right away. He nodded, jaw tense. I understand. Let me do whatever it takes. Lawyers, living arrangements, money for anything you need. If the judge claims you're unfit, we'll show that you have family support. Ebony flinched, remembering how she once daydreamed about having a father who could swoop in and fix her problems. It felt frighteningly easy to accept, yet her pride jabbed at her. I don't want to rely on your wallet to prove I can be a mom, she said quietly. I already am a mom. His gaze flickered with respect. I never meant to overshadow your efforts, but you shouldn't battle alone. I have a home near my base. It's quiet, stable. You and Serenity could stay there once you regain custody, if you'd like. Ebony's eyes stung. A real home. Was that possible? She forced caution into her tone. Let's get through court first. He nodded, respecting her guarded stance. The waitress arrived with their burgers, but Ebony found her stomach still clenched. She managed a few bites, aware of Colonel Carter watching her with concern. A heaviness hovered, years of separation compressed into an awkward meal. Yet beneath it, Ebony sensed a fragile hope. She told him about her diner hours, her classes. He asked about her favorite subjects, her aspirations. She confessed she wanted to finish high school and maybe become a social worker, so other young mothers wouldn't fall through the cracks. He listened intently, a look of pride dimming the sorrow in his eyes. After lunch, they stepped outside into the bright day, the tension between them softened by the shared meal. Gaines was waiting by a parked sedan, checking messages on his phone. He approached with a relieved smile. Everything okay? Colonel Carter gave a small nod. Better than I deserve. Ebony remained quiet, studying the man who had brought them together. She recalled how Gaines had said he was once under Colonel Carter's command. Perhaps loyalty and admiration fueled Gaines's dedication. They discussed strategies for the upcoming hearing. Gaines recommended that Ebony gather every piece of evidence showing her responsibility, from pay stubs to references. Colonel Carter promised to meet with a local attorney who specialized in family law. Ebony exhaled as the conversation wound down, realizing how quickly everything was happening. A day ago, she felt trapped by the judge's scorn. Now, multiple people stood ready to help. Colonel Carter glanced at Ebony. Where are you living now? She stiffened. A motel. He frowned. That's not adequate. I can rent a short-term apartment. Would you move in? It'd look better in court. Ebony's pride flared. I'm managing. My boss said I might get more hours. Her father's brow creased with concern, but he didn't push. Okay, but if you change your mind, just say the word. We have 2 weeks. We'll do whatever it takes. Ebony studied the cracks in the sidewalk. She knew living at the motel played right into McAllister's narrative that she was unstable. Yet she felt overwhelmed at letting Colonel Carter fix it. "I'll think about it," she said, voice subdued. She lifted her gaze. "Thank you for lunch." He nodded, face solemn. "Thank you for letting me try to help. I meant what I said. I want to be here now, for both of you." They parted soon after. Ebony watched the sedan pull away, Colonel Carter in the passenger seat, Gaines behind the wheel. Her heart thrummed with too many emotions. She had yearned for a father all her life. Now that she'd found him, or he'd found her, it felt like stepping onto unstable ground. But there was a chance this path led to Serenity's safe return. Ebony squared her shoulders. She would do whatever was necessary. She returned to her motel in a daze, passing the worn-down front desk clerk who barely glanced at her. Once inside her room, she locked the door, sank onto the bed and stared at her phone wallpaper. Serenity's tiny face. "We're not alone," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He's here, and we'll fight together." Part of her still worried about betrayal or some hidden agenda, but for now she had to trust. With each passing minute, the next hearing drew closer, and Judge McAllister's ominous shadow loomed. Ebony clutched her phone, inhaled unsteady breaths, and allowed herself a single ragged hope. That finally, a father's presence might tip the scales in favor of a teenage mother desperate to hold her child again. 4 days passed in a blur of painstaking preparation. Ebony awakened each morning at the motel. Her alarm always set an hour early so she could review paperwork before hurrying to catch the bus. She spent her afternoons serving diner customers, forcing a smile as she poured coffee and scribbled orders, all the while imagining how she would present herself at the next hearing. Colonel Carter, true to his word, stayed in Pinebridge, quietly coordinating resources behind the scenes. He found a local family law attorney named Lydia Park, an experienced advocate with a reputation for championing underdogs. On a brisk Thursday afternoon, Ebony arrived at Ms. Park's small office, Colonel Carter at her side. The neat waiting area featured a few chairs and a children's corner stacked with coloring books. Ebony's nerves spiked as Ms. Park stepped out, greeted them warmly, and guided them into a modest conference room. Ms. Park was a petite woman in her 40s, her short hair neatly styled. She offered Ebony a seat at a round table, then handed her a business card. "I'm glad Colonel Carter introduced us," she began, giving Ebony a kind look. "He's told me your situation. Let's start with your key concerns." Ebony glanced at the folder in front of her. "I want my daughter back," she said, voice catching. "Serenity's been in foster care for months. I've done everything the court asked, found a job, stayed in school, took parenting classes. But Judge McAllister still doesn't trust me." She clenched her hands. "It doesn't help that I'm 17. Ms. Park's expression softened. "Teen mothers often face harsh scrutiny. McAllister's stance is well known, but we can present a strong argument. We'll show you have both the determination and family support to care for Serenity." She paused, tapping a pen against a notepad. "Which brings us to Colonel Carter's role." Ebony's father cleared his throat. "I intend to provide stability, housing, financial backing, anything she needs to prove a safe environment for the baby." Ms. Park nodded. "That support could be crucial. McAllister can't ignore that Ebony's no longer alone. Also, I've filed a motion to unseal certain records the judge relied on to question Ebony's fitness." Ebony's stomach flipped at the reminder that the judge might be hiding documentation. "Do you think he'll comply?" she asked. Ms. Park offered a measured smile. "He'll have to if we shine enough light, but we should prepare for resistance." They spent the next hour assembling Ebony's file. Diner pay stubs, a letter from her boss vouching for her reliability, and statements from neighbors at the motel who could confirm Ebony maintained a calm environment. Colonel Carter added details about his own background, 20 years of distinguished service, no criminal record, a pension, and stable salary. Ms. Park explained that, in extreme cases, the court might even grant Ebony supervised custody at Colonel Carter's residence until she turned 18. Ebony felt her throat tighten, with an odd mix of gratitude and apprehension. She barely knew this man, yet he was prepared to open his life to her and Serenity. After finalizing the plan, Ebony paused in the doorway to Ms. Park's office. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ms. Park smiled. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a hard fight, but you're not alone." Colonel Carter placed a supportive hand on Ebony's shoulder as they left. Outside, the late afternoon sun glinted off parked cars. Ebony found herself walking slowly, weighed by the gravity of what lay ahead. They headed down the block in near silence until Colonel Carter spoke. "I've seen tough battles," he said softly, "but I never realized how relentless family court can be. I'm proud of how you're handling everything." Ebony's cheeks warmed. "I'm trying. I'm used to doing it by myself." She glanced at him sideways, noticing his reflective gaze. "You don't have to anymore," he said firmly. A pang of yearning squeezed her heart. She managed a nod, hoping she could let herself lean on him. They ended up at a small cafe, where Ebony ordered lemonade while Colonel Carter sipped tea. He asked about her mother, a topic Ebony found hard to address. "She drifted," Ebony explained haltingly. "We lived out of suitcases. Sometimes we stayed with her friends, other times in shelters. She never talked about you." Colonel Carter sighed, pain etched into the lines on his face. "I wish I'd known she was struggling. I would have done something even from afar." Ebony swallowed. "I used to imagine that." She changed the subject, not wanting to linger on old wounds. "Ms. Park thinks we have to prove beyond a doubt that I'm stable. Like show McAllister that I can move out of the motel." She winced, feeling self-conscious. Colonel Carter leaned forward. "I have a short-term rental lined up. It's near your diner. Furnished, safe neighborhood. If it helps, I'll pay the deposit. No pressure, but the court will look favorably on a more permanent address." Ebony hesitated, but she couldn't deny the advantage. "I can't afford first and last month's rent on my diner checks," she admitted quietly. "This feels like jumping into some huge change." He gave a rueful smile. "I know, but if it helps bring Serenity home sooner." Ebony let out a shaky breath, stirring her lemonade with a straw. She pictured the small, dark motel room, the peeling walls, the offhand remarks from the desk clerk whenever she walked by. Then she pictured a modest apartment, maybe a tiny nursery area for Serenity, a place free of leaky ceilings and suspicious odors. She whispered, "Okay, let's do it." Relief flickered in Colonel Carter's eyes, and Ebony felt a tremor of tentative hope. They parted ways soon afterward, Ebony agreeing to view the rental the next day. That night she returned to the motel to pack her few belongings. She felt a surreal sense of transition, folding her shirts into a duffel, tossing battered textbooks into a backpack. She wrapped up Serenity's baby blanket carefully, inhaling the faint scent of powder that lingered. She longed to have her daughter beside her, giggling and drooling as babies do, rather than across town in a stranger's home. "Not for much longer," she murmured, hugging the blanket. The next morning, Ebony met Colonel Carter in front of a brick building on Maple Street. A small courtyard held a few potted plants. The door led to a narrow hallway of apartment units. They headed upstairs to a one-bedroom with plain white walls, a modest living space, and a kitchenette. The furnishings were simple but serviceable: a couch, a small dining table, and a bed. Ebony walked around slowly, imagining a crib in the corner. She glanced at her father. "It's actually kind of nice." He nodded. "Good enough for now. Once you're 18, we can discuss more permanent plans." but if you want this place, it's ready." Ebony signed the lease that afternoon, Colonel Carter covering the deposit and first month's rent. She felt a rush of both gratitude and uncertainty. Yet the sense of having a stable address, even a simple one, quietly thrilled her. It was progress, a tangible step. She texted Ms. Park the new address, her heart lifting when she pictured presenting this in court. The following week unfolded with constant motion. Ebony juggled diner shifts, high school classes, and the slow process of moving into the new apartment. Colonel Carter joined her at the store, helping pick out baby supplies, a small playpen, diapers, formula, and Ebony marveled at how easily he navigated the baby aisle for a granddaughter he had never met. Each day, Ebony visited Serenity during scheduled sessions, showing photographs of the apartment to the caseworker, hoping it would speed the process. The foster mother, Mrs. Radcliffe, remained polite but distant, hinting that Ebony should temper her expectations. Ebony steeled her resolve. She couldn't let doubt creep in. A few days before the hearing, Ebony met with Ms. Park again. This time, Gaines was present, quietly updating them on the swirl of rumors around the courthouse. "Judge McAllister's been under scrutiny," he said. "It seems he was tied to certain financial backers who disliked Colonel Carter's past investigations. We suspect they pressured him to keep Ebony in the dark about her father." Ebony's indignation flared. They'd ruin a child's life just to keep secrets? Ms. Park pursed her lips. "Corruption can reach into unexpected corners. But we have facts now. We'll argue that Ebony's stable, employed, living in a safe residence, and supported by her father's resources." Colonel Carter placed a protective hand on Ebony's shoulder. "And if the judge has any integrity, he'll recognize she's more than capable." Ebony squeezed her father's hand, her emotions swirling at the realization that she was indeed forging a fragile bond with this man who had once been only a name. The night before the hearing, Ebony's nerves escalated. She sat in her nearly empty living room, longing for Serenity's presence. She busied herself with tidying the baby gear she had arranged in the corner, a borrowed crib from a local charity, soft toys from Colonel Carter, pastel blankets folded neatly. She wished she could hear the gentle rustle of her daughter breathing in that crib. Colonel Carter arrived with takeout, sensing her tension. "Ms. Park says tomorrow's just a hearing, not a final ruling," he reminded Ebony, handing her a paper carton. Ebony nodded, stirring noodles around without appetite. "But McAllister can at least give me more visitation, right?" Her father offered a confident nod. "He has to, if he's fair. We'll show how much you've done." Ebony swallowed, a shiver running through her. What if the judge refused? What if he dug in his heels, punishing them for challenging him? Colonel Carter read her expression. "I know it's scary," he said gently. "But no matter what, I'll stay in Pine Bridge as long as you need. We'll appeal if he denies you." Tears stung Ebony's eyes. She took a calming breath. "Thank you. I never thought I'd have someone backing me like this." Her father exhaled, regret tightening his face. "You should have had it from day one." That night, Ebony lay awake on the simple bed, staring at the ceiling, the apartment too quiet for comfort. She worried about how the judge might lash out. She feared losing Serenity forever if something went wrong. But amid the anxious swirl, she also felt a faint glimmer. She wasn't alone. Colonel Carter's unwavering support gave her courage. So did Ms. Park's legal strategy. In a few short hours, she'd step back into Pine Bridge County Courthouse, this time stronger, a new address in hand, and a father to stand by her side. She closed her eyes, clutching Serenity's blanket close, praying the next sunrise would mark the beginning of a brighter life for both mother and child. Dawn broke gray and sullen on the day of the hearing, mirroring the dread that had settled in Ebony's stomach overnight. Her new apartment felt both comforting and eerily silent as she prepared for court. The air mattress in the corner would soon be replaced by a real bed, courtesy of Colonel Carter's assistance. She reminded herself that every improvement was a sign of progress, something to show Judge McAllister that she wasn't the careless teen he'd painted her to be. Still, doubt churned beneath her resolve. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple blouse and a knee-length skirt. A glance in the bathroom mirror revealed shadows under her eyes. For a moment she closed them, picturing Serenity's tiny face. That image fueled her determination. She grabbed the neat binder Ms. Park had helped compile, pay stubs, lease agreement, references, then slipped on a light jacket. Outside, the corridor was quiet. She thought how strange it was to finally have a permanent address, with neighbors she barely knew, yet it already felt more like home than any motel ever had. Colonel Carter texted her just as she stepped into the stairwell. Outside. Ebony's pulse fluttered. They'd arranged to drive together, presenting a unified front in court. She wanted that solidarity, even if part of her still wrestled with how abruptly he'd entered her life. Reaching the street, she saw his rental car parked at the curb. He climbed out, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his military bearing. The early sun glinted on his short-cropped hair as he waved her over. "Morning," he greeted softly, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Ready?" Ebony gave a small nod, sliding into the passenger seat. "As ready as I can be," she replied, voice tight with nerves. He said nothing more, just offered a reassuring pat on her shoulder before starting the car. They drove in tense silence toward the courthouse, the radio off. Ebony kept the binder in her lap, flipping through pages to steady her thoughts. She paused on a photograph she'd printed, her new living room with a second-hand couch, a neatly folded baby blanket draped over the arm, proof of a future life with Serenity. When they arrived, Ms. Park stood by the courthouse steps, dressed in a crisp navy suit. Her calm smile anchored Ebony's rising anxiety. Colonel Carter parked quickly. Ebony breathed in the brisk autumn air, then walked up to join Ms. Park. "Good morning," the lawyer said gently. "We'll file your updated information right away, so the judge has no excuse to question your living arrangements." Ebony clung to the binder. "I'm so nervous." Ms. Park nodded. "I know. But remember, we have strong evidence that you're stable and supported. That's what matters." They made their way inside, crossing polished floors and passing through the security checkpoint. Memories of her last appearance rushed back. The judge's contempt, the humiliating sense of being powerless. This time, Ebony told herself, things were different. She had proof. She had her father. She steadied her shoulders, wishing she could hold Serenity's hand for luck. Instead, she pressed a trembling palm over her heart, as though keeping her child's spirit close. Courtroom 2 looked the same as before. High ceilings, wooden benches, a faint echo that magnified every whisper. The bailiff directed them to the respondent's table. Across the aisle sat the county's social services representative, who managed Ebony's case. No sign of any foster parents. Ebony tried not to let that worry her. She glanced back at Colonel Carter, who sat behind her with Ms. Park, a reassuring presence. When Judge McAllister finally entered, his black robe billowed, and the tension in the room thickened. Ebony noticed that he seemed more guarded than usual. Lines of strain creased his forehead, and his gaze flicked briefly over Colonel Carter before resting on Ebony. Memories of his scorn resurfaced, and her heart pounded. The bailiff called the session to order, and everyone stood until the judge took his seat. Case number 519. In the matter of Serenity Carter, the clerk read. Then she rattled off Ebony's name, the foster arrangement, and the petition for custody. Ebony inhaled carefully, bracing for the judge's familiar glower. He did not disappoint. Clearing his throat, he picked up a file. "Ms. Carter," he began, his voice echoing, "I see you've submitted new documentation." Ms. Park rose, her tone respectful. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has secured stable housing, maintained employment, and now has the support of her father, Colonel Daniel Carter." Silence gripped the room. Judge McAllister's mouth tightened at the mention of Colonel Carter. "Indeed," he said flatly. "A father who's been absent for her entire life decides to appear just in time for a custody hearing?" Colonel Carter stood, face calm but resolute. "Permission to address the court, Your Honor." McAllister's lips thinned, yet he nodded curtly. The older man walked forward, posture straight. "I have records proving I tried to locate my daughter for years," he said. "Only recently did I learn she was here, fighting alone for her child." Ebony watched the judge's jaw tighten. There was a fleeting look of unease, almost guilt, flitting through his eyes. "And what do you propose to offer Ms. Carter?" he asked, barely hiding his hostility. Colonel Carter kept his composure. "A stable environment, financial security, and guidance. She's responsible and determined, but she deserves family support." He paused, taking a breath. "Serenity is my granddaughter. I won't let her mother struggle without help." McAllister tapped his pen on the desk, gaze flicking to Ebony. "Miss Carter, do you believe you can fully care for an infant now? You're underage, in school, working part-time. Even if you have your father's assistance, how do you plan to manage?" Ebony's pulse raced, but Ms. Park had prepared her for this. She rose from her seat, meeting the judge's stare. "I've set up daycare options for while I'm at school or work," she said, voice trembling at first. "I have references from my boss confirming I can arrange flexible shifts, and I'm on track to graduate high school early next year. With Colonel Carter's support, I can provide Serenity with a safe, loving home. She's my daughter. I've done everything required." A tense silence stretched. The judge picked up some papers. "Your new lease on Maple Street," he said. "Paid by your father's money, correct?" Ebony fought not to cringe. "He covered the deposit, yes, but I'm paying monthly rent with my own earnings." She swallowed. "People ask parents for help all the time. Why should it be different for me just because I'm a teen?" McAllister's eyes narrowed. "Your father is no ordinary parent. He stopped himself abruptly, as though catching a slip. Ms. Park jumped in. "Your Honor, Ebony's father's background should only matter insofar as it aids the child's welfare. There's nothing improper about family helping family." A muscle in McAllister's jaw twitched. He looked down, shuffling papers. The social services representative spoke next, stating Ebony had complied with every requirement so far. "Her visits with Serenity have been positive," the worker said. "We have no evidence of neglect or instability beyond her young age." Ebony felt a wave of relief. She hoped that might weigh heavily in her favor. But McAllister wasn't done. He eyed Ebony with a harsh glint. "What about the rumor that Miss Carter has a history of transience, possibly run-ins with law enforcement as a juvenile?" Ebony's cheeks heated with outrage. She had never been arrested. Was he fishing for dirt? Ms. Park squared her shoulders. "Your Honor, that rumor is baseless. Ebony's mother moved frequently, but Ebony herself has no criminal record. If there's any documentation suggesting otherwise, we request it be produced immediately." McAllister stared at her for a long moment. Ebony's heart hammered. Would he conjure something bogus? She recalled Ms. Park warning that certain records might be falsified, but apparently he had nothing to provide. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well," he muttered. "We will continue hearing evidence, but I caution you, Miss Carter, raising a child is no simple feat. Teen parents often underestimate the responsibility." Ebony forced herself not to snap back. She placed both hands on the respondent's table, answering calmly, "I understand the responsibility, Your Honor. I've been carrying it for months, even without my baby in my arms. I intend to give Serenity a better life than I had." In that moment, she saw the judge's face flicker with something like conflict. He looked away, seemingly struggling to maintain his stern demeanor. Colonel Carter stepped forward again. "Your Honor, I'm prepared to sign an affidavit guaranteeing Ebony financial support and lodging. We have details about her daycare plan, her schedule, her emergency contacts. We've left nothing to chance." McAllister's gaze shifted between father and daughter. Ebony sensed the tension coiled behind his eyes. Then he snapped the file shut. "I'll review these materials," he announced, voice tight, "and reconvene this hearing in 1 week for a final determination. In the meantime, Miss Carter will have expanded visitation rights under supervision, 3 days per week, 4 hours per visit. That is all." He rapped his gavel with a thud, abruptly standing and sweeping out of the courtroom. Ebony's breath caught in relief and frustration. She'd hoped he might grant immediate custody, but at least she'd see Serenity more often. It was a step forward. Ms. Park placed a hand on Ebony's shoulder. "This is progress," she said gently. Colonel Carter exhaled, his tension fading. "We'll gather more evidence for next week." Ebony nodded, heart pounding, emotions in turmoil. She'd wanted more. Yet she couldn't ignore the small victory. 3 visits a week would let her hold her child, show her new home, maybe prove to any observer that she was ready. Still, as Ebony left the courtroom, a chill lingered. Judge McAllister's final look had been unsettling, almost a silent warning. She feared deeper secrets lurked behind his reluctance. But for now, she clutched this partial win. Serenity wasn't fully hers yet, but a crack of light had broken through. If she stayed strong, next week could bring the moment she'd dreamed of for months, cradling her daughter in a home they could finally call their own. Ebony's heart fluttered with anticipation all week, waiting for her newly expanded visits with Serenity. Though Judge McAllister had refused immediate custody, he'd at least allowed her more time with her baby. 12 precious hours divided over 3 days. It wasn't enough, but it was more than she'd ever had, and she clung to that gift like a lifeline. Each morning, she woke early to text Colonel Carter or Ms. Park about any new developments. By mid-afternoon, she'd dash off from either class or her diner shift to make the bus ride to Mrs. Radcliffe's place. On the first visit, Ebony arrived carrying a diaper bag she'd packed herself. She had included a few small toys and a soft pink blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. Mrs. Radcliffe opened the door with her usual distant politeness, leading Ebony to the modest living room where Serenity lay on a playmat, swatting at dangling shapes. Tears burned Ebony's eyes at the sight of her daughter's dark, curious gaze and pudgy arms. She lowered herself onto the floor, breath catching. 4 hours stretched ahead, yet they'd never feel long enough. "Hello, sweet girl," Ebony whispered, scooping Serenity up. The baby blinked as if to recognize this voice that came and went so unpredictably. Ebony kissed Serenity's cheeks, heart soaring at the faint gurgle of contentment. She spread the pink blanket on the floor and sat down to play, holding up rattles and stuffed animals. Serenity's clumsy swats made Ebony grin with delight. The foster mother hovered near the doorway, quietly observing. Ebony reminded herself to stay calm. She must prove competence, patience, maturity, no trace of teenage rashness that the judge liked to imply. "May I give her a bottle?" Ebony asked. Mrs. Radcliffe nodded. Serenity fussed a little when Ebony tried to feed her, but then settled, tiny lips drawing at the formula. The closeness of this routine made Ebony ache with longing. She wanted to do this every day, not just in a stranger's home under watchful eyes. Yet it was progress. She hummed softly, a lullaby that Serenity seemed to like, noting how the baby's eyelids fluttered contentedly. Colonel Carter showed up halfway through, having gotten permission from the social worker to attend one supervised visit a week. Ebony felt both relieved and uneasy. She was still growing used to his presence. He stepped into the room with a quiet greeting, face lighting up at the sight of Serenity. "She's bigger than in the photos," he murmured, crouching down. Ebony nodded, pride swelling. "She's strong too, always moving." Serenity babbled, eyes flicking between mother and grandfather, as though trying to place their voices. They spent the remainder of the visit fussing over Serenity together, Ebony letting Colonel Carter hold the baby while she cleared away the empty bottle. She couldn't deny how kind he was with his granddaughter. He cradled her carefully, using the same gentle hush Ebony employed. Mrs. Radcliffe offered no comment, but Ebony felt her guarded gaze. When the 4 hours ended, Ebony's chest constricted as she placed Serenity back in Mrs. Radcliffe's arms. The baby fussed in protest, tiny hands grasping Ebony's collar. Ebony bit her lip hard, refusing to cry in front of the foster mother. She only murmured, "See you soon, sweet girl." Outside on the steps, Ebony inhaled shakily. Colonel Carter placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It won't be like this for long," he said. "Next week is your final hearing, and Ms. Park's strategy is solid." Ebony nodded, forcing a tight smile. "I know." But fear still gnawed at her. Judge McAllister's reluctance was palpable, and Ebony suspected he might try one last maneuver to delay or deny her. That anxiety bled into her daily life, her schoolwork, her diner shifts, even her sleep. She had nightmares about empty cribs and locked doors, about her baby's voice fading into silence. One evening, Ebony returned to her new apartment and found Colonel Carter waiting in the hallway. He held a thick envelope. "Ms. Park asked me to drop these off," he explained. "Additional documents to bolster your case." Ebony unlocked her door, letting him inside. The small living space felt cozier each time she came home, though she wished Serenity was there to fill it with baby laughter. She flipped through the envelope, seeing references and statements from neighbors at the motel who confirmed Ebony was quiet, responsible, bits of evidence that added to her credibility. Colonel Carter lingered, eyes scanning the neat arrangement of baby supplies. "Mind if we talk a minute?" Ebony sighed, sinking onto the second-hand couch. "Sure," he cleared his throat. "I wanted to say this earlier but never got the chance. You've handled everything with remarkable strength. I admire that." Ebony's throat tightened. She had spent years longing for parental praise, uncertain if it would ever come. "Thanks," she managed. "I'm just doing what I have to for Serenity." A slight pause. "I realize how overwhelming it might be, me showing up out of nowhere," he said softly. "I wish I could change the past, but I can't. Just know, whatever happens next week, I'm here." Ebony met his gaze, her eyes brimming with complex emotions. Gratitude, lingering hurt, cautious hope. "I want to believe you," she whispered. He nodded, not pushing. "Show me over time," she added quietly. "That's all I ask." That night, Ebony couldn't sleep. She scrolled through photos of Serenity, swiping between the few snapshots she'd been allowed to take. Her baby's wide eyes gazed back, stirring Ebony's fierce love. She closed her eyes, imagining the day she could carry Serenity out of that foster house and into their very own apartment. The dream felt both within reach and impossibly precarious, balanced on the whim of a judge who seemed determined to bury something about Ebony's family history. The following day, Ms. Park called an impromptu meeting at her office. Colonel Carter and Marcus Gaines joined them around a small conference table. Ms. Park's expression was grave. "I've heard rumors that someone's trying to dig up old allegations against Ebony. Stuff from her mother's past, maybe implying Ebony was involved. It's baseless. but McAllister might let it muddy the waters. Ebony's stomach dropped. "That's ridiculous. I never broke the law." Gaines chimed in. "We suspect it's an attempt to paint Ebony as a potential risk to Serenity." Ms. Park tapped her pen. "We can only counter if they produce actual documentation, but it's wise to prepare Ebony's responses. If they claim she lived in a house tied to criminal activity, for instance, Ebony can confirm she was just a minor with no involvement." Ebony let out a tremulous breath. "Fine. I'll tell the truth. That's all I have." Colonel Carter's voice hardened. "What they're doing is cruel and illegal if they're manufacturing false evidence." Ms. Park nodded in sympathy. "Corruption sometimes runs deep. We'll stay vigilant." As Ebony left the meeting, dread settled in her belly again. She prayed Ms. Park's skill would prevail. The final hearing was only days away. Each hour felt like a countdown to a confrontation that could either restore her child or crush her spirit. Ebony immersed herself in preparing for each supervised visit, cherishing every coo and giggle from Serenity. She tried new baby foods, read board books aloud, and sang lullabies. The watching eyes of the foster mother and the social worker no longer fazed her. She was too focused on showing her devotion to Serenity, letting no one question her resolve. Meanwhile, Colonel Carter spent his days quietly following leads, determined to discover more about McAllister's motivations. He uncovered old local news articles where the judge and certain county officials were named in controversies involving mismanaged funds. Ebony read them with a mixture of anger and apprehension. If McAllister had abused his power before, he might do so again. Yet Ms. Park warned them not to launch direct accusations without irrefutable evidence. "Focus on Ebony's fitness as a mother," she said. "We'll handle any dirty tricks as they arise." The final night before the hearing, Ebony found herself pacing her living room, phone in hand. She dialed Mrs. Radcliffe's number just to confirm that Serenity was fine. The foster mother's curt reassurance rang hollow. Ebony set the phone aside, hugging a stuffed bunny she'd bought for Serenity. Tears threatened. She inhaled slowly, telling herself that come tomorrow she would stand tall, armed with every shred of truth. Across town, Colonel Carter likely felt the same tension. Ms. Park had promised to arrive early to ensure their documentation was organized. Ebony forced herself into bed, the bunny on one side, Serenity's baby blanket on the other, clinging to hopes of a restful sleep. She only managed a few hours of dozing before her alarm blared, yanking her into pre-dawn darkness. Fear and excitement buzzed in her veins. She showered, dressed in the same blouse she'd worn at the last hearing, like armor, and grabbed her binder. Today would decide everything. If McAllister refused her custody, Ebony wasn't sure how she'd cope. Yet she had no choice but to push forward, refusing to let Serenity grow up in a system Ebony had battled her entire life. Colonel Carter met her at the curb again, his expression quietly determined. "Ready?" he asked. Ebony's throat felt too tight for words, so she just nodded. As they pulled away, the sky glowed pink with sunrise, as though promising a fresh start. Ebony whispered a silent plea. "Let me bring my daughter home." Ebony's entire body thrummed with tension as she and Colonel Carter walked through the courthouse doors. Today was the day of the final custody hearing, a moment she'd both craved and dreaded. They bypassed security quickly, Ebony's binder pressed firmly to her chest. She tried to keep her breathing steady, repeating Ms. Park's instructions in her mind. Remain calm, answer truthfully, don't let the judge provoke you. Colonel Carter walked beside her in silence, his gaze scanning the hallway as though on alert. At the top of the stairs, Ms. Park waved them over. She stood with Marcus Gaines in a small alcove, away from the foot traffic of the corridor. "Any last-minute changes?" Ebony asked, her voice quivering slightly. Ms. Park shook her head. Not that we know of. I've filed all the necessary motions. Just be prepared. If Judge McAllister springs any surprise allegations, we'll demand evidence on the record. Ebony nodded. I'm ready. The group made its way to courtroom 2. The bailiff, who was starting to recognize Ebony from repeated appearances, gestured for them to enter. The room, filled with scattered onlookers, felt cold. Ebony glimpsed Mrs. Radcliffe in the back row. The foster mother gave a small nod, though her expression was unreadable. Meanwhile, the county social worker and a different agency lawyer took seats at the prosecution table. Ebony wondered if they planned to contest her custody or merely observe. She settled at the respondent's table next to Ms. Park, Colonel Carter behind her for moral support. Her stomach flipped when she heard the judge's footsteps echo from a side door. Moments later, Judge McAllister emerged in his robe, brows drawn low. The tension in him was palpable, as though a storm gathered behind his eyes. Everyone rose, then sat at his curt nod. The case clerk called it, "In the matter of Serenity Carter, final custody determination." Ebony inhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. She glanced at Ms. Park, who offered a faint, reassuring smile. McAllister cleared his throat. "We are reconvened to address custody of Serenity Carter. I've reviewed the additional materials. Ms. Park, you may proceed with any further testimony or statements." Ms. Park rose, voice steady. "Your Honor, we reiterate that my client, Ebony Carter, is fully capable of providing a safe, stable home for her infant. She's employed, maintains a suitable apartment, has arranged child care, and has the support of her father, Colonel Daniel Carter. We ask the court to return Serenity immediately to Ebony's custody." A murmur rustled through the room. Judge McAllister's expression darkened. "Ms. Park, teen motherhood remains a serious concern. Youthful optimism does not always translate to responsible parenting. However," he paused as though wrestling with the words, "I acknowledge she has complied with court requirements. Before we render a final decision, are there any further arguments?" The agency lawyer stood briefly, explaining the foster mother's perspective. "Mrs. Radcliffe has no objection to reunification, provided Ebony meets any conditions the court imposes." Ebony felt a rush of relief. At least she wasn't facing an argument from that side. Then the lawyer added, "We do request that Ebony continue to receive in-home visits from a social worker to confirm Serenity's well-being." Ebony nodded, unoffended. If it meant having her daughter, she'd gladly accept. Judge McAllister shuffled papers, gaze flicking briefly to Colonel Carter. "Colonel, you have something to add?" The older man stood, voice calm. "I support immediate custody to Ebony. She's done everything right, and I will ensure she has the resources needed to succeed. Denying her custody now would be punishing her without cause." The judge's jaw clenched. Ebony braced for a backlash, but McAllister didn't immediately speak. He glanced at a file on his desk, his knuckles whitening on the gavel's handle. Tension rippled through the gallery. Just when Ebony thought he might pronounce his decision, he abruptly looked at Ms. Park. "Does your client deny involvement in an alleged break-in incident at age 14? A shockwave of confusion ran through Ebony. Ms. Park stiffened. "Your Honor, we have no record of any break-in charge or arrest," she said carefully. "Where is this allegation coming from?" Judge McAllister lifted a piece of paper. "An anonymous tip claims that Ebony Carter participated in minor thefts alongside her mother, who was associated with a known burglary suspect." Ebony's mouth went dry. She'd never stolen anything in her life. Sure, she'd been dragged to shady places by her mother, but Ebony never committed a crime. "That's false," Ebony blurted, heart hammering. "I've never been arrested or charged." Ms. Park demanded, "We request disclosure of any purported evidence, Your Honor." McAllister looked cornered for a moment, then mumbled, The tip references a police report that was never prosecuted due to insufficient evidence. Ms. Park pressed on. If there's no charge, it's legally irrelevant. We move to strike this rumor as inadmissible. A tense silence. Judge McAllister cleared his throat. Very well, I'll disregard it unless substantiated. But you see the pattern, Ms. Carter, he said, addressing Ebony directly. Your mother's transient, possibly criminal lifestyle could have shaped your judgment. Ebony felt anger flare. She steadied her voice. I'm not my mother. I've worked hard to avoid her mistakes. My record is clean. The judge's lips twisted, but he didn't argue. Another moment of silence stretched while Ebony's heart thumped painfully. She could almost see McAllister struggling to maintain his earlier position of skepticism. Finally, he tapped his pen. I must decide based on the child's best interests. Despite my reservations about teenage parenting, Ms. Carter has shown notable responsibility. The father's support further solidifies her situation. Unless there is other evidence. He paused, eyes scanning the courtroom. When no one spoke, he exhaled. Then, this court grants primary custody to Ebony Carter, effective immediately. A social worker will conduct monthly in-home visits. If Ebony completes school and maintains employment, custody remains hers. Any violation may bring re-review. Ebony's eyes widened, tears gathering. She felt Ms. Park's hand squeeze hers in triumph. Colonel Carter released a breath of relief behind them. The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The words reverberated, echoing in Ebony's mind. She'd done it. She had custody. She nearly sank to her knees, overwhelmed, but Ms. Park helped her stand. Her father clapped a hand on her shoulder with a quiet, "Congratulations." Ebony glanced around, disoriented. She'd imagined this moment for months, long, agonizing months. Mrs. Radcliffe approached from the gallery, holding a diaper bag. I was told to bring Serenity, she said, eyes misting a bit. They said if custody was granted. Ebony's heart soared. She stepped forward, and Mrs. Radcliffe gently handed Serenity over. The baby squirmed, blinking at the bright lights. Ebony cradled her carefully, tears slipping down her cheeks. Hi, baby girl, she whispered, voice choked with emotion. We're going home. A hush fell as Ebony pressed her face against Serenity's soft hair. Everyone seemed to sense the enormity of the moment. Even Judge McAllister paused in his exit, observing with a tight-lipped expression. Colonel Carter edged closer, a gentle smile shaping his features. Ms. Park discreetly wiped her eyes. For a fleeting second, Ebony felt pure, all-consuming joy. Then Judge McAllister swiftly retreated from the bench, his robe swirling. Ebony glimpsed a strange turmoil in his eyes before he vanished through the side door. She wondered if guilt gnawed at him, or if something else was at play. The question nagged her, but she focused on Serenity, who yawned and reached a tiny hand to pat Ebony's cheek. Colonel Carter left briefly to finalize paperwork with Ms. Park, ensuring Ebony got the official custody order in hand. Ebony stayed behind, letting Serenity's warm weight anchor her in the present. She thanked Mrs. Radcliffe quietly for caring for her daughter. The woman gave a small, bittersweet smile. She's a good baby. I wish you both the best. Take care. Ebony nodded, grateful, then stepped into the hallway, hugging her daughter close. Outside the courtroom, Ms. Park rejoined them with a huge grin. All set, she said, brandishing a file. You can go home together. Colonel Carter offered Ebony the car keys. I'll follow in the rental. You can drive Serenity in your new car seat. Ebony blinked, remembering he'd installed a baby seat in his car for her. She swallowed a lump of gratitude. Thank you, she murmured. I never thought I'd leave here with her in my arms. She and Serenity rode the elevator down to the ground floor, Ms. Park and Colonel Carter accompanying them. A small crowd stared curiously at the young mother cradling a baby, tears of relief on her face. Ebony didn't care. She looked at Serenity and felt a fierce flood of love. "I promise," she whispered against her daughter's forehead, "I'll do everything to keep you safe and happy." The car ride home felt surreal. Serenity dozed in the back seat, the late morning light flickering through passing trees. Ebony's stomach fluttered, mind replaying the judge's closing words. She'd secured custody with conditions, but that was expected. She'd do whatever it took to maintain the court's trust. When she pulled up to her apartment building, Colonel Carter arrived soon after, parking alongside her. He hurried to open her door, and she gently unfastened Serenity's seatbelt. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Ebony hushed her tenderly, gathering the diaper bag. "Welcome home," she said to her daughter, stepping onto the curb. Colonel Carter hovered, looking elated and unsure at once. Inside the apartment, Ebony closed the door behind them, and tears threatened again at the sight of Serenity in this space she'd prepared. The second-hand crib, the small living area. She laid Serenity down on a blanket near the couch, letting her wiggle and peer around. Colonel Carter watched, blinking rapidly. "It's good to finally see her where she belongs," he said. Ebony nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. She knelt to tickle Serenity's foot, eliciting a curious coo. A warm hush enveloped the room, the weight of months of struggle lifting. Ebony felt almost dizzy with gratitude and relief. She still remembered that first humiliating hearing, Judge McAllister's scorn, the heartbreak of leaving Serenity in foster care. Now the baby's bright eyes gazed at her from a place they could share, day and night. "Thank you," Ebony whispered to Colonel Carter, voice trembling. "For everything. I know we have a lot to figure out, but—" He shook his head gently. "No thanks needed. This is how it should have been from the start." Ebony exhaled, heart soaring, wanting to believe that. Perhaps they could build a real family bond now, free from secrets. She kissed Serenity's tiny hand, letting the baby grip her finger. Over Colonel Carter's shoulder, she caught sight of the custody order Ms. Park had emailed to her phone, a digital confirmation that this moment was real. She'd won. They'd won. But Ebony also remembered the haunted look in Judge McAllister's eyes, the corruption Colonel Carter had hinted at, and the anonymous tip about a childhood crime. Questions lingered about what truly lay behind it all. For now, though, Ebony cradled Serenity, feeling the newborn softness against her chest. She breathed in that sweet baby scent and reveled in the soft gurgles. That night, for the first time, mother and daughter would sleep under the same roof without fear of being separated in the morning. Outside, the autumn sun blazed bright, as if celebrating a victory long overdue. Sunlight streamed into Ebony's apartment the next morning, illuminating a scene she'd dreamed of for months. Serenity nestled in her crib, cooing as she stretched tiny arms toward the dangling mobile. Ebony stood at the edge, phone in hand, capturing a short video to mark their first morning at home together. Her heart squeezed with gratitude. No more waiting rooms, no more leaving Serenity in a stranger's care. This was real life now, hers and Serenity's. Colonel Carter had left the previous evening, giving them space to settle in. Ebony spent hours showing Serenity around their modest apartment, laying out stuffed animals, gently rocking her in the worn armchair. Each time she glanced at the custody order displayed on her phone, relief swelled within her. After so long fighting, she finally possessed what she'd wanted most, the simple gift of being a mother in her own home. By noon, she was dressed and ready to take Serenity on their first walk, a stroll around the block to introduce her to the neighborhood. She bundled the baby in a soft blanket, secured her in a borrowed stroller, and headed downstairs. The sky was a crisp blue, the sunshine welcome after so many cloudy days. Ebony savored the fresh air, pointing out squirrels and passing cars to her infant, who gazed around with wide-eyed curiosity. They passed a small grocery store and a tiny park where Ebony imagined taking Serenity to swing once she was bigger. On the return trip, Ebony's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She checked the screen. Ms. Park. Adjusting the stroller, Ebony answered. "Hello?" Ms. Park's tone sounded grim. "Ebony, I've just received unsettling news. The State Bar is investigating Judge McAllister for possible misconduct. There's talk of forged documents and manipulation in multiple family court cases." Ebony's steps faltered. "Forged documents?" she repeated, voice hushed. Images of that mysterious tip about Ebony's supposed theft case flashed in her mind. Yes, word is investigators suspect certain people bribed McAllister or leveraged blackmail to secure outcomes they wanted. I'm not sure how deep it goes. Ebony's pulse sped up. Does it affect my custody ruling? She hated the thought of Serenity being dragged back into uncertainty. As of now, no, Ms. Park assured her. You have a valid, signed order. But be prepared for questions if they review your case file. If they discover he acted improperly, your custody might be reevaluated, but likely in your favor, since you were the harmed party, if anything. Just don't panic. Easier said than done. Ebony thanked Ms. Park, then continued pushing Serenity's stroller, her mind racing. Judge McAllister's harshness toward her, his reluctance to reveal Colonel Carter's identity, could all tie into broader corruption. A chill prickled her spine. Was someone out there still trying to manipulate her life? She returned home feeling the day had lost some of its brightness. Serenity dozed peacefully, unaware of the turbulence swirling around them. Over the following days, Ebony tried to focus on caring for her child. Each moment was precious. Bath time discoveries, sleepy snuggles, nighttime feedings. She got used to the gentle weight of Serenity dozing on her shoulder, the tiny fingers clutching her shirt. But every so often, the mention of McAllister's investigation popped up in the local news, unsettling Ebony. Colonel Carter and Ms. Park visited regularly, updating her on rumors. The judge's name kept surfacing in articles about bribery and hidden ties to wealthy power brokers. One afternoon, Colonel Carter arrived with a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing Ebony the front page. "Judge McAllister under fire. Criminal inquiry looms," the headline blared. Ebony skimmed it, noting references to sealed records and suspicious rulings. She shivered. "I can't believe I was just one of many cases he tried to manipulate." Colonel Carter nodded, brow furrowed. "Apparently, he's been blocking investigations for years, especially ones that might implicate him or his associates. It's possible that's why he withheld my identity. We still don't know the full story, but I'm pushing my contacts to dig deeper." Ebony swallowed hard, recalling how powerless she'd felt in that first hearing, how McAllister had sneered at her mothering skills. If the judge had personal reasons to sabotage her case, it both angered and frightened her. "At least now Serenity is safe with me," she said quietly. "I don't think he can take her away on a whim." Colonel Carter gave a reassuring nod. "He can't, not without a formal legal process. And if he's under investigation, he's in no position to harass you. But watch out for new attempts to discredit you. People tied to McAllister might see you as a threat." Ebony's stomach twisted. She remembered those old rumors about her mother's alleged crimes and the suggestion Ebony was complicit. "I'll be careful." That evening, she sat alone after putting Serenity to bed. The apartment was hushed, except for the baby monitor's soft crackle. Ebony scrolled through local social media, stumbling upon a thread discussing McAllister's corruption scandal. People posted stories of being unfairly treated in his courtroom, mothers losing custody, fathers saddled with unreasonable child support, all hinting that bribes decided cases. Ebony's gut tightened. She thought about the heartbreak she'd experienced, the terror that Serenity might slip away forever. Had the judge been playing some twisted game? Yet the voices on the thread also expressed hope that a thorough investigation would bring justice. Ebony felt a surge of solidarity with these strangers. She typed a small comment under an anonymous handle, urging them to speak up about wrongful rulings. Though she couldn't fully reveal her story, she wanted to encourage others. It felt like one more step in reclaiming power from a man who once tried to crush her. A few days later, a nervous knock sounded on Ebony's apartment door. She peered through the peephole, only to see a woman she didn't recognize. Carefully, Ebony cracked the door open, heart thudding. "Can I help you?" The woman, tall with a sharp haircut, introduced herself as Bianca Torres, an investigator with the state attorney's office. She flashed a badge. "May I speak with you about Judge McAllister?" Ebony's breath caught. She shifted uncomfortably but let the woman in. Torres offered a polite nod, scanning the neat living area. The baby was awake in her bouncer, gurgling at the sight of a new face. Ebony hovered near Serenity, protective. "Why do you want to talk to me?" she asked. Torres softened her tone. "We're gathering information from people who appeared in his courtroom, especially where there might have been misconduct. Could you tell me about your experiences and whether you suspect improper behavior?" Fighting nerves, Ebony retrieved her file from the coffee table, the same one she'd relied on in court. "Judge McAllister tried to bury my father's identity," she said cautiously. "He also hinted at made-up charges to discredit me. I believe he wanted me to lose custody for reasons I don't understand." Torres listened intently, taking notes. Ebony described how McAllister only backed down once Colonel Carter intervened. "He never explained himself. He just looked terrified whenever my father was mentioned," Ebony added. Torres nodded, flipping pages in a folder. "Your father's Colonel Daniel Carter, correct? We have reason to believe McAllister had ties to a group that felt threatened by Carter's previous investigations. It's possible they pressured the judge to block or harass people connected to him. You and your child got caught in that crossfire." Ebony felt a hot jolt of anger. They'd ruin my life, my daughter's life, just to get at my father. The investigator sighed. "It appears so, but if you're willing to provide an official statement, it may help our case." Ebony glanced at Serenity's big eyes. She had no desire to rehash painful memories in a formal deposition, but if it meant exposing the judge's corruption and preventing others from similar anguish, she couldn't refuse. "I'll do it," she said. "I won't let him keep hurting people." Torres smiled gratefully. "Thank you. I'll arrange a time. Please be cautious. Once your statement is on record, you might attract attention from McAllister's allies. If you notice anything suspicious, contact law enforcement." After Torres left, Ebony paced the living room, adrenaline pulsing. She placed Serenity in her crib, heart pounding at the notion that even though she'd won custody, forces beyond her control might still pose a threat. She couldn't undo the past, but at least she could shine light on injustice. The next day, she called Ms. Park, who agreed to accompany her during any official interviews. Together, they scheduled Ebony's deposition with the state attorney's office. In the days leading up to it, Ebony felt tense but resolute. She tried to focus on Serenity's routine, feeding, diaper changes, snatches of laughter as the baby became more alert and active. Whenever anxiety bit at her, she reminded herself that testifying might protect others. Colonel Carter supported her wholeheartedly, promising extra security if needed. Gaines echoed those assurances, dropping by to check on the apartment's locks and advising her to vary her routes when going out. The morning of her deposition arrived. Ms. Park met Ebony outside the attorney's building. Serenity stayed in Colonel Carter's care for a few hours, so Ebony could concentrate on giving her statement. Ebony's palms sweated as she entered a small interview room where investigator Torres waited. They went through the formalities. Ebony stated her full name, birth date, and circumstances of her custody case, describing every interaction with McAllister that felt manipulative or suspicious. Ms. Park watched carefully, ensuring Ebony maintained composure and clarity. "I believe he had ulterior motives," Ebony concluded, voice tight. "I could see it in his eyes. He was stalling me, searching for excuses to call me unfit, withholding the truth about my father. He almost succeeded in taking my child away." Her hands trembled on the table, remembering the terror she'd felt as a teenage mother at the mercy of a man with too much power. Torres nodded gravely. "Thank you, Ebony. Your testimony aligns with patterns we've discovered in other cases. We appreciate your bravery." When they left, Ms. Park patted Ebony's shoulder. "You did well. Now we wait. This investigation may take time." Ebony exhaled, her chest tighter than she expected. "I just hope they stop him from hurting anyone else." Ms. Park offered a kind smile. "Investigations like these often lead to indictments if evidence is strong. McAllister isn't untouchable." Ebony nodded. Recalling the judge's haunted expression, she wondered if he already sensed his downfall looming. She returned home, finding Colonel Carter rocking Serenity gently. The baby gurgled and reached for Ebony. Relief and warmth spilled through her. "All done?" Colonel Carter asked gently. Ebony nodded, scooping Serenity into her arms. "Yeah, I told them everything." A solemn hush fell as Colonel Carter watched his daughter and granddaughter, perhaps recognizing how close they'd come to losing each other to a corrupt system. Ebony pressed a kiss to Serenity's forehead, silently vowing that no matter what happened next, this family, however newly forged, would face it together. In the weeks following Ebony's deposition, life unfolded in a curious blend of relief and simmering tension. Each morning, she awoke to Serenity's gentle babble, a reminder that all her struggles had led to a precious reward. Yet beneath each routine, diaper changes, morning cuddles, quiet walks in the autumn air, she carried the knowledge that Judge McAllister's investigation still loomed in the background. Rumors circulated of looming indictments, sealed files cracking open, and powerful figures stepping back in fear of exposure. Ebony tried to stay calm, focus on her tiny family, and trust that truth would prevail. She kept in close contact with Ms. Park, who relayed updates on the ever-widening probe. The lawyer explained that Ebony's testimony had proven critical in confirming how McAllister and unnamed associates once maneuvered to keep Colonel Carter away. Other mothers, too, came forward, describing suspicious rulings and abrupt terminations of parental rights. Slowly, Ebony sensed the community shifting from whispered allegations to full-throated demands for accountability. Reports began airing on local TV, describing a culture of corruption corroding Pine Bridge's family court system. During this tumult, Ebony and Serenity built a daily rhythm. Mornings were for feeding and playtime, afternoons for Ebony's high school coursework. She was enrolled in an online program that Colonel Carter helped arrange, so she wouldn't have to leave Serenity for long periods. Occasional visits from a social worker confirmed that mother and child thrived in their snug, tidy apartment. Ebony's father often dropped by with groceries or offered to babysit while she studied, slipping easily into his role as supportive grandfather. Though Ebony still fought pangs of resentment for all the lost years, each small kindness mended a fracture in her heart. Colonel Carter's presence turned especially pivotal when Ebony's anxiety spiked. Anytime the investigation triggered fresh news articles or ominous rumors, she found herself imagining worst-case scenarios. What if someone tried to retaliate? What if forged paperwork re-emerged to challenge her custody again? Late at night, she'd watch Serenity's gentle breathing and feel chilled at the thought of losing her. Colonel Carter reassured her that Ms. Park and the state investigators were vigilant. "They can't repeat the same lies," he said, voice firm. "Now we have proof on our side." Eventually, Ebony's phone buzzed with the call she'd been anticipating. Ms. Park, sounding triumphant, announced that the state attorney's office had officially filed charges against McAllister for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Weeks of collecting statements and following money trails had built a solid case. When Ebony heard the news, she felt her chest lighten. The judge who nearly destroyed her life would finally face consequences. Though it couldn't erase her hardships, the knowledge offered validation and might save other families from heartbreak. Still, Ebony's relief mixed with anger. She remembered how McAllister had scorned her in open court, casting her as an irresponsible teen unworthy of motherhood. To learn that he himself stood at the center of a corrupt web felt both vindicating and infuriating. She shared her thoughts with Colonel Carter, while Serenity napped one afternoon, both of them slumped on the couch. "How many people lost their kids because of him?" she asked quietly, tears of rage in her eyes. Colonel Carter set aside his coffee cup. "Far too many," he replied. "The best we can do is testify when needed and ensure no one else suffers." That chance came sooner than expected. Investigators requested Ebony appear before a grand jury deciding further indictments tied to the judge's circle. Ms. Park assured Ebony this appearance would focus on repeating her sworn statements about the judge's attempts to bury crucial evidence and push false allegations. Facing another legal proceeding terrified her, but Ebony summoned her newfound courage. She loved her child fiercely, and if testifying again helped shine light into the shadows, she would do it. When the day arrived, Colonel Carter accompanied Ebony to the county courthouse, the same building she now loathed and feared. She kissed Serenity goodbye, leaving her in Ms. Park's office with a friendly paralegal. Then Ebony marched through the marble halls, flanked by her father's steady presence. The hush felt ominous, but she walked taller this time, not the frightened girl who once trembled at McAllister's glare. Inside the grand jury room, investigators asked pointed questions: how the judge reacted upon learning Colonel Carter's identity, how Ebony sensed deception in his manner. She recounted each detail calmly, refusing to be intimidated by the solemn faces watching. Outside, after the session ended, Ms. Park praised Ebony's composure. Colonel Carter squeezed her hand, pride shining in his eyes. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I hope you realize how strong you've become." Ebony managed a teary smile. She thought of the many times she'd doubted her own strength, long nights waiting for Serenity, uncertain days in that motel, humiliating showdowns in front of a powerful judge. And now she stood free, mother and daughter safe, forging a path no corrupt official could bar her from. Over the next month, Ebony settled deeper into her role as a mother and a student. She balanced online school assignments with diaper changes and lullabies. Colonel Carter occasionally traveled back to his base, but he always returned within days, determined not to miss precious moments with his granddaughter. He brought small gifts, like plush toys or baby clothes. Ebony insisted she didn't need extravagance. She simply appreciated him showing up, proving that fatherhood could be about everyday presence rather than grand gestures. Meanwhile, news reports began confirming the downfall of McAllister's circle. A local billionaire who'd funded backdoor deals found himself indicted for bribery, and several longtime allies of the judge faced investigations into money laundering. Ebony no longer felt fear reading these updates. She felt an undercurrent of satisfaction, imagining other families like hers finding relief. Serenity's custody was no longer uncertain, and Ebony wished every parent who'd suffered wrongful rulings could taste this same triumph. One clear afternoon, Ebony pushed Serenity's stroller toward a small park, meeting Ms. Park and Colonel Carter for a celebratory lunch. Ms. Park brought a folder containing Ebony's final social worker report. No concerns regarding Ebony Carter's parenting skills. Child appears healthy, happy, and bonded. Ebony let out an incredulous laugh of joy. "Seems like I'm allowed to be a normal mom now," she remarked wryly. Colonel Carter grinned. "No more looming threats. You've earned the peace that should have been yours from the start." They ate sandwiches at a wooden picnic table, the baby sleeping in her stroller. Ms. Park asked Ebony about her plans, finishing high school, maybe applying to community college. Ebony glanced at Colonel Carter, then back at Ms. Park. "I want to eventually become a social worker," she admitted. "I know how broken the system can be. I want to help other young moms." Ms. Park's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Your experiences could inspire real change." Later that evening, back at the apartment, Ebony rocked Serenity in her arms, thinking about how far they'd come. The months of uncertainty had tested every part of her. She remembered the first court date, Judge McAllister's roar, and the heartbreak of handing Serenity to a foster mother. She thought of nights alone in a cramped motel, terrified she'd never be deemed worthy of raising her own child. Now that storm had passed. She felt more certain of herself, as though each obstacle had forged resilience within her. Colonel Carter stopped by to say goodbye before returning to his base. Serenity, half awake, clutched his finger. Ebony smiled, still adjusting to the sight of father and granddaughter united. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up. On me, on her." He exhaled, eyes moist. "It's my duty, but also my privilege. I've missed so much. I want to be around for as many tomorrows as I can." Ebony nodded, pressing Serenity's warm cheek to her father's hand in a silent promise. They were a family now, bound by love and forged through trials neither asked for, but both survived. When Colonel Carter left, Ebony stood by the window, watching dusk settle over the quiet street. She rocked Serenity gently, feeling the baby relax into slumber. Tomorrow held no hearing, no urgent calls from Ms. Park, no anxious depositions. It held errands, playtime, perhaps a video chat with Colonel Carter. Normal life, the kind Ebony once thought unattainable, stretched before her. She whispered in the dimness, "I'll protect you forever, Serenity." The baby stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, then nestled closer. Ebony kissed her brow, remembering the fierce desperation that propelled her to fight tooth and nail in front of a hostile judge. Now that Judge faced the justice he'd denied others, and Ebony reveled in freedom. She was 17, a mother, a survivor. No, more than that. She was strong in a way she'd never imagined. Stepping gently into the nursery corner, Ebony laid Serenity in her crib. She gazed at the dozing infant for a long moment, tears of gratitude swelling. They were safe. They had a home. She'd shattered the barriers set by corruption and prejudice, reclaiming both her child and the father she never knew. Though the future remained uncertain, Ebony felt hope shining like a new dawn, guided by a love that refused to surrender. With that sense of promise, she whispered a final lullaby and watched Serenity's breathing steady, cherishing a peace they'd fought so hard to earn.